over the impact of the trade dispute between the US and not only China, but all its big trading partners. And South Africa has already felt the impact directly. Now, exporters have been affected by higher import duties, you'll remember, on steel and aluminium entering the United States. The United States government is now mulling possible duties on car and vehicle component parts. Now, this could affect South Africa's efforts to attract the world's top car makers, which are already manufacturing here in South Africa and benefiting, some of them, from our preferential access to US markets under the American law called AGOA. To discuss, we're joined by the Deputy Director General of Trade and Industry, Xolelwa Mlumbi. She's live for us in our studio in Pretoria. Thank you for being with us. The Trade and Industry Minister has raised his concerns. Let's start with how serious this could be for South Africa, the possible tariffs on car parts.
Well, in terms of 2017, we exported close to 15.8 billion worth of both autos as well as auto components. And 93% of that was passenger vehicles and 4% was mainly auto components. So if you look at that, it's a significant part of our exports. However, one of our auto manufacturers is no longer going to export to the US market. Because it has changed the production line to another type of a model that will be destined mainly for the African continent, the EU, and the rest of the world. So if you look at 2018 going forward, we are expected to have a significant reduction in our passenger vehicles that are going to the US market.
Like you say, this is an economic contributor in South Africa. I spoke to the head of Volkswagen. They said they won't be impacted. I don't know if you're talking about them, but not many cars going to America. But what are the other impacts for other manufacturers? Are we talking about job losses here? Will this affect our growth?
If we look at auto components, which is likely to be significantly impacted by this, we are likely to see job losses because the auto manufacturers of components will have to pay a duty should the US government decide to impose the Section 232 duties. So for now, the investigation is still ongoing. We don't know how big the impact will be because the US has not yet indicated what will be the percentage of those duties. So we'll await the investigation. When the minister met with his counterparts in the US, Secretary Ross for Commerce, he indicated that they expect to finalize the investigation by August. So we will have to wait to see until then what will be the impact with regards to our auto components.
And what is South Africa really doing about this? Your department saying that the Minister Rob Davies spoke to these American officials. How persuasive are we being right now?
Well, firstly, I think the important factor to note is that the US is undertaking the Section 232 investigations on the basis of their national security imperatives. So what we can do as South Africa is to make submissions into the process. And on Thursday, our ambassador to the US, Ambassador Mnino Mahlangu, will be making a presentation through the process that is already outlined by the US government. So what we would expect is that the US government would look at all of those submissions, and we've already made our submissions when we spoke to Secretary Ross as well as Ambassador Lighthizer, the US trade representative, about the significant impact that this will have on South African exports. Because if you look at auto components and autos, in 2016 they accounted for 80% of our exports under AGOA. Of course, as I said, because we are going to reduce our exports of vehicles into the US, given that one manufacturer has now decided to change the model, we are likely to see a significant reduction in our exports of vehicles to the US. But ultimately, this will have an impact, and we are concerned. And we have raised concerns not only bilaterally as South Africa with the US, but also through the Africa group of trade ministers that are beneficiaries under AGOA, where there was a coordinated message about the impact of the Section 232 duties in terms of eroding the AGOA benefits to sub-Saharan African countries.
Well, if I heard you correctly, so 80% of our exports under AGOA are linked to cars. So we're talking about AGOA, all the benefits that we've had in the past basically being wiped out.
That is the main concern, that if you look at autos, they account for a significant portion of our exports under AGOA. So it's a key concern for us. And there are not a number of countries that are able to export diversified products into the US market. And one of the key objectives of AGOA was to assist African countries to diversify their market base and also exports into the US market. So the concern was raised by the African trade ministers that if you look at the products that are affected by the Section 232, it's value-added exports, then the impact of this is likely to be that African countries that are benefiting under AGOA will mainly be exporters of primary products, and this will not contribute to the broader development objectives of the region in terms of diversification and industrialization.
Ms. Mlumbi, if we look back, we've been through rough negotiations when AGOA was threatened in the past over the chicken exports to the US and poultry coming into South Africa. There was a long period of uncertainty. I don't think South Africa seemed to come out on top or to persuade those American officials. Now, with Donald Trump at the top, is there any chance of success here?
I think there is, because there is recognition from the US stakeholders that we've engaged with, both from the government as well as the private sector, that the African continent, of which South Africa is part, is a significant growth opportunity, not only for the US but also globally. And a number of African trade partners are cooperating with the African continent. And this also gives the opportunity for the US government to look at how it can strengthen its economic ties with one of the growing regions in the world. And what we have emphasized, and the minister has emphasized in the discussions, was that sometimes there is a focus on only the trade arrangement as the basis for growing or strengthening economic ties between the US as well as sub-Saharan Africa, while there are other avenues that can be explored, such as business-to-business cooperation when it comes to infrastructure development, given the huge infrastructure deficit that exists in the continent, as well as the development integration agenda that the continent is pursuing. And in this regard, the opportunities for cooperation when it comes to industrial development as well as infrastructure development. And I think there was recognition that there is an opportunity for us to also explore those avenues so that we can see an increase in US investments on industrial development as well as infrastructure development.
All right, thank you very much for your time this evening. Deputy Director General of Trade and Industry, Xolelwa Mlumbi, Peter. So South Africa is asking, it's another thing if America, the United States, is listening and we're being affected by that trade war. I can tell you that the Rand was doing wonderfully well today based on the lull and concerns about the trade war and the EU talking to China. So maybe other nations, blocs starting to work around the United States. However, our stocks in the doldrums, Bongani was talking about the economic growth data out of China not looking as hot as it could be, and that's weighing on our miners. The JSE down significantly. Let's take a look.
Madiba has always been one man who is brave.